All right, welcome everybody. Clearwater Jazz Holidays, Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. We are here today with Tamara Danielsson, and her topic is articulation for the sax player. If you can say it, you can play it. Tammy, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much for being with us, everybody, for the courtesy of the session again. Everybody is muted. But you can ask questions. You can send those questions in the chat feature. We'll get them to Tammy. Thank you for following along. We record all of these sessions for the purposes of Clearwater Jazz Holiday education and outreach. And what happens after these live sessions is they get recorded. The video gets put in the studio, which is a resource as part of www.clearwaterjazz.com. through our education and outreach section. And you can also listen to these if you'd rather listen than watch. And we have a wonderful podcast. It's called the Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions Podcast, which has over 2,000 views in just a couple months of doing this. So we're really excited for those taking advantage of these free resources. If you have feedback, let us know. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to do a session that you would enjoy if you have a special topic. Let me tell you a little bit about Tammy, and then I'm going to turn it over to her for her session today. Tammy's a native of Seattle, Washington. She received her BM in Jazz Studies from North Texas State University, where she earned a spot as lead alto saxophonist in the Grammy-nominated 1 O'Clock Lab Band, and shared the stage with such notables as Dizzy Gillespie, Pepper Adams, and Lou Soloff. She has since established herself as a versatile soloist and quote-unquote sideman who has performed with artists such as jazz legends Clark Terry, pop jazz superstars Bob James and Natalie Cole, soul and blues icons Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, Motown Smokey Robinson, and Ellen Rose Momentum Women in Jazz Project. As a member of Chuck Owens' Innovative Jazz Surge, whose last 3 recordings garnered a total of 7 Grammy nominations, including Best Large Jazz Ensemble for Whispers on the Wind in 2018, Tammy has recorded and or performed with jazz greats Chick Corea, Slide Hampton, Bob Mintzer, Randy Brecker, Ingrid Jensen, and more. Tammy also currently holds the lead alto chair in the Jazz Orchestra at Dr. Phillips Center under the direction of Rodney Whitaker. Now in its 3rd season, it is the first collaboration of its kind between Jazz at Lincoln Center and a performing arts center. She has traveled the world performing on stages in South Africa, Europe, Scandinavia, South America, Canada, and throughout the United States. Her music can be heard on numerous recordings, including her solo CD, So It Goes, and collaborative efforts with jazz great Danny Gottlieb Danielsson Project, as well as 2 CDs with revered Swedish trumpeter Jan Allen, Dear Old Stockholm, and Artwork. Besides the Jazz Surge recordings, her lead alto playing can be heard on recordings by Dallas Collection Jazz Orchestra and NT's 1 O'Clock Lab Band. She holds a master's degree in jazz studies from the University of South Florida, and along with being an active performer, is a clinician and teacher as well. As a teaching artist with Disney's Jazz It Up workshops, she works with young students from throughout the U.S. and Canada. She's taught applied saxophone at the University of South Florida, Rollins College, and Florida Southern College. She currently enjoys sharing her knowledge in her private studio and with students of Windermere Preparatory School in Windermere, Florida. She's also the co-author of the Mel Bay instructional book, Essential Jazz Lines in the Style of Cannonball Adderley. We are so excited to have Tammy with us as part of this. This is her first Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions with us. Tammy, thank you so much for being a special part of this. I'm going to turn it over to you now. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Steve. It's really, really nice to be a part of this. I've seen some of the other sessions you've done, and the wealth of knowledge is so valuable, and I'm learning all the time. I'm looking forward to going through all of them as I get the time to do that. So it's nice to see all of you that are here today, and anybody that should show up to watch this in the future. The subject today we're talking about is jazz articulation for the saxophone player. I am a saxophone player, so it's what I know. Some of it may apply to other horn players. For now, I'm pretty much focusing on the saxophone player. Articulation is a big, important part of how we make the music come alive, and the articulation is basically the parameters of the note, how you attack it, how it decays, how you end a note. The important thing about it is that it makes the music come alive. So how do you use articulation to make your jazz lines come alive? How do you do that? And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to try to slow down. I have a habit of talking really fast when I get excited. So I'm going to slow down a little bit, and I'm going to take a pause from articulation right now just to stress the importance of the fundamentals for the instrumentalist or for any musician anywhere, actually. As a student of jazz, a student of music, a student of the saxophone, you want to make sure that you are continually working on your fundamentals. Those would include your breathing and your breath control, which you work on through overtones, long tones, and breathing exercises. Your finger technique, which you work on through etudes and scales and patterns, all those things. You can combine the long tones and the finger technique by doing studies like the Close study, where you say you take the number 3 exercise and you just slur the whole thing. You end up playing a long tone all the way through while you're also working on your fingers, hopefully with a metronome, to kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone, I guess you would call it. Tonguing is a important thing to be working on as a fundamental. I've heard that the tongue is the strongest muscle in your body, but it's actually not. Fun fact, I looked it up. The tongue is what do you call it? It's a conglomeration of 8 different muscles that combine to create a flexible, muscular, I think it's called an iconoclast or hydroclast or something like that. Basically, like mimics the, it's like a tentacles on an octopus. So that's a good visual, I guess. The tongue being a big tentacle there. But the fact is that you can strengthen and increase the flexibility and the speed of the tongue muscles, or of the tongue, so that you can improve your articulation that way. The other thing fundamentally is, I would say, time. And all these things combined, if you, the better your air and breathing, the better your articulation. The better your fingering technique, the better your articulation. The better your tonguing, the better your articulation. The better your time, the better your articulation. So they all work hand in hand. You don't want to neglect any of those things. So that being said, I would like to say that the probably most important thing about learning jazz articulation is using your ears to listen, 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 listen. So listen to anything and everything, not just horn players. Saxophone players, listen to soloists. My favorite all-time of the legends would be Cannonball Adderley, but I love Sonny Stitt and Parker and Paul Desmond, and of course tenor players, Sonny Rollins, Dexter, Coltrane, all these things, all these guys. Listen to those. Big bands, if you want to learn phrasing in a big band, make sure that you're listening to Marshall Royal from the Basie Band, and I'm drawing a blank, from Ellington. You know who I'm talking about. Ellington's lead alto player. There is a band that I listened to. How I actually learned to phrase and play lead alto was listening to the band Francie Bolan, Kenny Clark, big band out of Europe. Their lead alto player, who died very, very young, I believe, his name was Derek Humble. So you probably, not a lot of people have heard of him, but if you've heard of the Francie Bolan, Kenny Clark big band, you will have heard Derek Humble. Lovely, lovely player, wonderful phrasing, wonderful articulation. The band included Johnny Griffin in the saxophone section, Sahib Sahab. If you haven't listened to the Francie Bolan big band, check some of those recordings out. They're fabulous. Wonderful sax solos in there. Good thing to do, to listen for articulation. So I think I'm going to share, just to go over some sort of fundamentals of jazz phrasing for the saxophone. I think I'm going to share a video with you, or if I can do that, share screen. Not a video, but a little, I think this is it. No, that's not it. There it is. Does that say jazz syllables on it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the topic, I call it, if you can say it, you can play it. Because, does it say there, when you're working on articulation, sing or say the lines using syllables for the notes. So when I work with my students, we make all kinds of funny faces at each other and make all kinds of strange sounds without our horn. And that includes some of these syllables that I use to have them sing the lines. Now, these syllables for the saxophone are the closest and chosen because they mimic the tongue movement for saxophone players. And you can see that the ones that are written, pretty much the most important ones are da and dot, but there's also do, ah, and dit. And I've written down there a couple of instances where you would use those. Do is used in usually kind of on the downbeat followed by an eighth note. For instance, do dot. Dot would be an at sound with a D-A-H-T, pronounced dot. That's would be used like on a quarter note to make it sound fat, or on a the upper side of a 2/8 notes, like do dot, or dot 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 do dot. Ah is just kind of no tongue used, and dit would be in very precise situation where you would want it really short. It's used probably more, in my opinion, for in funk stuff, when you're really wanting to bite off a note. Then I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. So there we go. If I'm going to include some of that in, I guess I can upload a materials. Is that correct?
Yeah, no problem. We could get those up on the site.
Yeah. So those are the syllables. Now, a little quick little thing on swing, and I've come across this book recently. I think it's pretty new. I don't know if you can see it. It's called, what is it called? The Articulate Jazz Musician, by Jeff Coffin and Caleb Chapman. Those of you who know Jeff Coffin, this gentleman right here, the saxophone player for the Dave Matthews Band, his own group called Mutet, and he was also with Bella Fleck and the Flecktones. And Caleb Chapman runs the Soundhouse Jazz program in Utah. Wonderful educator. And they've come up with this book on basically articulation. And there's some really good things in here, some things that match what I'm going to talk about. So that's kind of included in materials that you might want to look for, especially if you have anything to do with teaching students about articulation. But in that book, they talk about swinging notes. So I guess we have to start there with swinging a note, and assume kind of that I'm going to start from the spot where you're aware and you know that the way that you swing a note, it refers to the concept of playing the downbeat or onbeat eighth notes longer than the offbeat eighth notes, which gives the music a lifting sound. This is from the book. Traditionally in jazz, even though the eighth note should be played unevenly, they are notated or written as equal eighth notes. The length of the notes in relation to each other vary at different tempos. At slower speeds, the notes are more uneven. At higher speeds or tempos, the notes become more similar in length. At a medium tempo, it's best to think of two eighth notes being played as eighth note triplet, where the first two notes are tied together. So you are a student of music, whatever level you are, swinging eighth notes is basically da 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 da. The key thing for me is, and I've run into with students, is there's a lot of times they'll separate the two notes, and it's really, really important that you don't separate those notes. And I like to describe it as having a water hose, or I guess you could say air hose, coming up from your belly up through your throat and out your mouth. And that water hose is never shut off or kinked. You kink a water hose and the water shuts off. You squeeze it and the water shuts off. You kink your neck this way or that way, or up or down. You're going to obstruct that flow of water. So now imagine that being air always moving. You want your air to always be moving. You want nothing really to obstruct that air intensity. So create a constant airstream, and even when you stop a note with your tongue or you stop a note, you still have that imagined airstream going, that intensity from the diaphragm and the air moving through. So when you're playing, I'm playing what's normally taught as the way to articulate swing notes, which would be da, 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 da. So you tongue the first one, you slur the next two, you tongue the next one, you slur the next two. And share screen again for a second with, I think, this one. And there it is. Slow it down. So notice I'm not going. So that's kind of what I hear most in young players doing, where they'll cut off that note. So you want to imagine that airstream is constantly moving. That will keep you from getting that ricky-ticky sound. No space between the notes. So that's a swing note, that's the swing lines. Now, I'm gonna get a little bit more involved in and actually how you make these sounds and the movements within the mouth. First thing you need to do is make sure you have flexibility in the jaw, and you want to have flexibility there, and you want to have a flexible tongue. So a lot of times I will have, and this might be really kind of weird to do on, back off a little bit, but I'll have my students start with doing this kind of thing, which is also a sort of a fundamental, a lot of teachers have their students do when they're first learning to score embouchure, but so if they can't do that, if they can't go up and down on the mouthpiece and still sustain the note, that's something to work on, the flexibility in the jaw. The other thing that I have my students do, now this is gonna get actually a little, okay, let me back up for a second and just say that this is the way I do it. Now, jazz is a language. If you think of articulation being an accent, I speak English at home. My husband, who's from Sweden, speaks English at home. We don't pronounce the words the same. They sound slightly different, right? But we both say the correct words. And soloists develop their own accents. You know, when you listen to Phil Woods articulate his lines, it sounds different than when you listen to Paul Desmond articulate his lines. So, which you'll find out by listening to them, right? So in a big band, you know, that's fine for soloists. You want to have that individualness. But if you're in a big band or you're playing with a group of others and you're trying to match articulations, it's important that you sort of have a target point of how you're supposed to do it. Imagine you've got 5 people and they're all from different countries. Somebody has a Chinese accent, somebody's got a Swedish accent, somebody's got a South Texas accent, someone's got a Portuguese accent, and they're all reciting the same poem. And it's gonna sound kind of wonky. It's gonna, you know, it's not gonna be quite unison, right? As everybody who's sort of playing the same, saying the same inflections, articulating it the same. So you want to have some target as to where you should be with the articulation. It's one of the things I love about the Jazz Surge saxophone section. They're all very individual players. Jack Wilkins, fantastic tenor soloist, and Rex Wertz is the other tenor soloist, who's very, very different than Jack in his sound and his style and his phrasing. Yet when they come together, along with Valerie Gillespie and Matt Vance, everybody really opens their ears to listen to everybody else, to mimic and play the same inflections and the same articulations. So back to articulations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my accent now. And maybe the best thing to do would be to play something and then start to pick it apart a little bit and tell you what I'm doing. So I'm going to take something from, this is from Jim Snidero's book. I don't know if I mentioned this yet. This is Jim Snidero's Conceptions for Saxophone. In fact, I will pull that one up as well. If I can get that. Here it is. Share screen. All right. Do you just see this one here?
So we see, I mean, we can see everything on your desktop, but it's covering, so this is the IND line A train.
Okay, yeah. This is, yeah, this is the second page. Okay. All right. I'm just going to play it for you. I'm playing it at a medium tempo. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so that's IND line. That's basically A train, if you could hear that. So in talking about my accent, in jazz, there are some very, I guess you would say they're typical, typical rhythms and phrases that are part of the jazz lexicon or part of the jazz language. And if you get to know those rhythms and how they're articulated normally, then it becomes much easier just to repeat them. So one of them would be the do da, and you've got that on the second bar there. Another one would be that and do dot, that and do dot. You know, something like that, where you've got a moving line, da do da, da do da. So let's take this apart a little bit then, using those symbols that we talked about. So do da do da do da da do da. So I used a do da do da do da da do da. All right, so that's you would repeat the phrase first, do da do da do da da do da. Be very aware of what the tongue is doing, how it's moving. Do da, how it's approaching the reed, and when it comes down. The dot is a very standard in jazz, the quarter note, phrasing that as a dot. It's fatter than a regular quarter note would be. I'm constantly telling my students that note is, you know, what they play in concert band is a lot different than when they play it in jazz. So you want the tongue to come down, and then you want it to come back on the roof of the mouth, and you want a da, which makes the tongue come a little bit farther down from the reed, and then back up to stop it. So for instance, in bar 3, so those dot, dot, do, dot, da. And again in bar 38. There's another dot there. So anytime you have that, let me go back and unshare the screen now. Anytime you have one of these, if you can see that, yeah, one of those articulations, that means dot. The reason I like these Snydero books, I think I mentioned them to you. Jim Snydero is we shared, we went to North Texas for a hot minute together a while back, and phenomenal saxophone player. If you haven't checked him out, you need to. But he has a series of books called Jazz Conception, Easy Jazz Conception. And I use these with my students all the time. And that partly because he has the articulations written so well, and they're easy to follow. He even has in here, he'll X out little notes, and those X'd out little notes are what some people a lot of times will say ghosting notes. And that's something I'd like to talk about, because I call it something different in my accent on the saxophone. I call it nudge tonguing. Now, I want to talk about that a little bit, because there are some different ways of swinging notes, aside from just the mental picture of the uneven do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-da. That swings the individual notes. How do you swing the lines now? How do you make it go do da-da and do da-da? So you're not gonna, you talk to somebody and you're not going to talk monotone like this. You're going to have highs and lows in the way you speak, and you're going to change your volume, and you're going to change your pitch and all that kind of stuff, right? So you don't talk monotone. You wouldn't play monotone. I'm going to play this line here. And I'm going to play it this time by not accenting anything, but swinging the notes. All right, I've got my air moving forward. I was constantly moving. I have the concept of the swing sound, but it's not really swinging very much, because it's very sort of monotone there. So what I need to do is make some notes pop out a little bit more than others, and some notes accented, and some notes sort of ghosted. If you've ever had a band director or somebody tells you, oh, just swing it, just ghost the note. Well, how do you do that? How do you ghost a note? What is ghosting a note? I have something that for lack of a better term, I call it nudge tonguing. Some people call it something else. I call it nudge tonguing. And what that is taking your tongue and placing it, you can see this, placing it kind of lightly on the reed to sort of deaden the reed, and usually not in the middle of the reed, because the reed then that will cut your airstream off. So somehow you got to keep the air moving through. I will sometimes sort of slightly turn my tongue and just deaden the side of the reed. And what happens then is you do this. So I'm playing the note, I'm keeping my air moving forward. I'm not spreading my air out anywhere. I'm just still moving forward, but I'm deadening the reed to make it sound sort of muted a little bit. And then when I drop my tongue down, it pops the next note out. So I'll have my students play a long note. And then start moving the tongue. So it goes. da, 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 da. There's a little bit of a burst of air as the tongue comes down, as it pops down. So, because it sounds to me like a nudge, I call it a nudge tongue. So where that would apply is often when they talk about ghosting a note. The problem with ghosting a note, most of my students think it means choking it off or cutting off the air. And it really doesn't. You never stop that flow of air. You never turn off that water hose. Keeps going. So I'm going to pull up a different Etude right now where I've kind of written out where all those nudges are. And I've had a lot of students, and I know a lot of students recently have been auditioning for Allstate. So I took the Allstate swing Etude. This is a lot of stuff here. And it looks a little bit messy, apologize for that. But I went above and wrote the syllables above each of those notes that I would do. Now, it's not ironclad. This is what I would do. There are people who believe that you don't really use the tongue at all. So, for instance, that first line would be, if you don't use the tongue, you're basically kind of just using your concept of the swing and your jaw to make it sound like that. If you use the da dia dia dia, that kind of works too. I throw into that one a nudge on the G sharp, or on the, sorry, no, it's on the B. I circled the nudges, that's what I did. The one that's circled is a B. So do it slowly. So if you could, I don't know if you, it's really subtle. I don't know if you could hear it. So I'm sort of nudging that B, and then when I pull it down, it pops the E out. So that dot really has some impact on the end of there. Where really you can hear a lot better is the next line that goes. You hear those, I've marked them. So if I was working with a student, I would have them sing this line or say this line. Da, do, da, do, da, do, do, sorry, do, da, 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 do, da. Oh, sorry, do, da, do. I can't even do it without the horn in my mouth. Do, da, do, da, do, da, dot. So I use the sound for do, da, do, da, do, do, da, do, da, do, da, dot, do, da, dot. Where it really helps out is when you start to play faster. When you have more time and it's slower, you can tongue more of them. Pretty much tongued all those, but try to play a fast line by either just doing a jaw. So now try doing it with just tongue 1, slur 2. Now use the nudge tongue. And now speed it up. Which one is easier to do? Okay, that one was no tongue at all. That one doesn't work at all. That's the tongue 1, slur 2. And then the nudge tongue. You might not hear a lot of difference between the first one and the last one, but if there's no tongue at all, to me it doesn't have quite the pop that it has with the nudge tongue. So where it really comes into play is when you're playing fast. But you, in this case, in the Allstate piece that we're looking at, you can still use it when you're playing it slowly. And the key is when you're nudging it not to stop the air. So it sounds like I'm going. But I'm naturally nudging those N1s and popping out the upper ones. And what that ends up doing is making your accented notes pop a little bit more. And the accent notes in jazz articulation, they tend to be in the upper notes. I mean, in a line, say you have this line here, and you're just going to tongue the accented notes. Which is something I also have the students go through and just play really the essence of the line and what is the shape of the line, and then fill the other notes in. So you get that feeling of the accents in there. Go on to the next little line there. You've got a dot, do da, do da, do da, do da. Kind of take out, I kind of leave out those 16 notes because they feel like ornaments to me. The core of that line is da, do da, do da, do da. So if you say that, da, do da, do da, do da, there is no nudge tongues in there. You're using the do and the da and the dot to sing and say those lines. Dot, do da, do da, do da, do dot. Then you got a line coming up. Do dot and do da, do da, do dot. Is that what I wrote? Da da and do da, do da, da, do da, da, da. So if I didn't put anything there, that's a ah. That's no tongue. It's kind of slurred in it. And in this piece, there are certain lines that they actually that they mark for sure that they want you to do. So sorry. So there's the dot and dot and dot. Dot and do dot and do dot and do da dot. That's definitely a dot and do da dot and do da dot and do da dot dot. So that's the nudge tonguing. That's something you can practice. It's feels a little bit wonky at first, getting used to that and being able to do it without cutting the note off and keeping the airflow going, which is really, really important. Do da dot and do da do dot. It's the last line. So do da dot and do do dot. Do da dot and do dot. And the more you do it, the more you see the patterns, the easier it is. Obviously, the more you do something, the easier it becomes. But the more you see the patterns, I have a student actually, shout out to my student Matthew. He's never played in a jazz band before, decided he wanted to play in a jazz band. And so he's got super big ears. we worked on the stuff, and he actually made the Florida Youth Symphony Orchestra jazz band. So super proud of him. But he listens really hard, and we'll go through pieces, and I'll have him identify, where does the nudge go in this? Where does the nudge go in this? And he's getting it. He's starting to know where it goes. It just takes a little while to execute it, but knowing where it goes is, I'm going to stop sharing, is real important. Have I lost everybody? And do you have any questions?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat feature. We'll get those to Tammy. And Tammy, I'll let you know if I see any.
Yeah. So there are other parts, other things about articulation that are little other standard things that you do. Like, for instance, that little line that goes, the da da. So saxophone players do this little thing where they do almost like a little kind of shimmer or a little partial of a vibrato to make that da da sound, where it's a little bit of a cutoff there, a little bit of a space before that A to the D. Do ba do da da. You cut that note off. Da da. Then there's ornaments. As in classical music, we have our ornaments in jazz. They include scoops. There's a tendency for more inexperienced players to overuse the scoop. And I always tell my students not to scoop on the upper notes in general, unless it's really required, because you'll hear and a scoop. When you're going to scoop, you got to make sure your air is pointed forward, that it's not spreading out this way. That's often what happens. Is why it sounds like it's too flat or something, is because they'll scoop and the air will go, bulge out sideways or something, go the wrong way. You need to drive the air forward all the time. If you're going to do that, I wouldn't scoop on that one anyway. So, but if there's like, for instance, this one. Oh no, that's not one. Actually, I don't see one on here. I see one on the Snidero piece. Yeah, here. So I used my own sense from listening to other players and other musicians and other artists and how they phrase that. To the first scoop was written, but then I added the others. But still, the scoop, air's moving forward. Dwa-da, dwa-da. Sometimes when you've got a scoop that is a short one, like just a dwee, you'll bump it with a finger. So for instance, if you're going to do it on a G. So I'll do a little bit with the lip and a little bit with the finger as well to make that sound. Ends of notes, if you're not using that little shimmer on the end. Ends of notes are really important too. In the big band context, if you're playing lead out or something, it's really important. The ends of notes are really important. So you want to make sure that you're cutting them off with the tongue. The tongue just comes and slaps up there and stops that note. So the tongue has to be really flexible, especially when you, like, I noticed that the do-da-do-da-do-da-do-da-da, that and dot and dot, that's, you can do it slowly, but when you start to do it really fast, you hear horn players who scat sing, do da and do da da and do da and do da and do da and there's that do da and do da and do da and that allows them to play in faster and swinging style. So, but the tongue becomes less. There's less movement in it. Is what I was actually going to try to say. There's less movement in the tongue. It's sort of just it floats out there and it moves a little bit softer as you're doing. You know, just bumps things here and there. A little bit faster. But don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. My tongue is moving. Don't do that. So I would encourage everybody when you're trying to learn or improve your articulation to sing it. Use the symbols that mimic what your tongue is doing, the do, dot, or dot, do, dot, or do, da, da, do, da, da, there's that nudge tongue. Do, da, do, da, do, da, da. Sing through it. And be aware when you're listening to other players, really be aware of how they're articulating. Do you hear them doing that? You know, do you hear them? Can you hear that nudge tongue in other players? Can you hear how they accent notes? How are they doing that? Are they using that? Are they using those syllables? Stay away from the so da dia 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 dia. That's not a hard fast rule. That's there's times when you use that, but.
Hey, Tammy, we do have a question. Austin Vickery, the very talented Austin Vickery, and our good friend is in the session today, and he was asking, what is your alto mouthpiece setup, and how does that play into how easily you are able to articulate successfully?
Well, my setup is a jazz setup, so it's a Beechler S5S hard rubber. Small chamber, number 5. It tends to be a little darker than other Beechler mouthpieces, and I have a Java, I think it's 2.5 or 3 reed on it. So I have noticed, I used to think this is the only one I could ever play, but I have played some other mouthpieces lately that I like as well. It's free blowing, I guess you could say that. It's open and bright. Although, again, this one's a little darker than some of them, but so that I guess would contribute to the free blowing part of it. Would contribute to having the less restriction to be able to use your tongue a little bit. I haven't really actually thought about how that contributes to the articulation because I don't play. I have another couple of mouthpieces I play, but that hadn't been come into the equation of what I was thinking about for the but I guess only I would say that it's the freedom in the blowing and the openness of it, the brightness of it. The brightness is one thing because I can get that kind of poppy sound out of that. Although can mellow out the sound a little bit and it pops out as well. So that's my setup. That's, I think, how it contributes for me. It just makes it's bright and free blowing. if I have a bad read on, that doesn't work. So not sure that answered your question, but.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy.
So yeah, basically, I mean, I could go on and going one by one through each lick, but I am not going to subject you to that. But I'll just say again, the nudge technique is my own personal accent. That's how I do it. That's how I produce the sort of swinging articulation. Specifically in faster things, it becomes more into play, but that's what I use. Let me go through. I'm going to share one time, and then I can let you go. But I'm going to share the swing etude with you one more time. That's the high school one, or the audition piece, and I'm going to play it. I'm going to try to ignore what I wrote as far as the dot and dot and don, but you can follow those and see if I did it, if I'm doing the same thing I wrote down. It is a little bit, sometimes it can vary. So now if I can find it. So you can follow along, and I'm going to play it. Try not to do too fast. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there's how close did I come? Or can you even hear it? I mean, admittedly, it's really subtle. It's very, very subtle. I would have to do it very slowly. Like stopping every time I do the nudge. But see how the accented note pops out after the nudge? Do dot. Right? So that's how I do it. Are there any other questions?
Sounds awesome. So Tammy, I have a question. I was reading this quote from Saxophone Journal about you, and it got me thinking about practice and practicing habits. The quote said, "The first thing one immediately notices when listening to saxophonist and author and educator Tamara Danielsson live is the breadth and size of her sound. It's not just large or big, it's huge and beautiful beyond description, with a tonal quality that is full and robust, with perfect intonation no matter where in the register she plays. One listen and you know you have met a musician who has obviously spent time in the practice room." It's not just her sound, however, that captivates. Danielsson plays with impeccable articulation, a sense of phrasing that is the definition of musicality incarnate, and all of the other elements necessary to not just bowl over an audience, but to make them gasp in delight as well. That's a great quote, but it does talk about the practice room, and I'm wondering, I didn't mean to make you blush, but what I did want to ask you was, how have your practice habits changed? We have a lot of students that follow these sessions and that are being told about how to practice and go about their regimen. Thinking back, how have your practice habits changed into becoming a professional? What is your approach now? How important is it? Do you still focus on fundamentals?
Always. That's always a part of the practice session. And as I get farther on in age, I realize that if I go too long without playing, like trumpet players, they always talked about, oh, I didn't play for a few days and it's killing me now. And so I noticed that when I don't play for a while, it's hard. It takes a little longer for the muscles to get back. But the practice, here's what I wish I would have known when I was younger. I wish I would have been told how to structure my time, how to roughly in what order to work on things, and just given a sort of overview of what a practice session would look like. So I have my students keep a folder, now as a digital folder, of first long tone exercises. That's always a go-to. And like I said before, long tones also work. You're doing the close 3. So I'm using my air, I'm breathing the whole time. That's a long tone for me. So I believe in not wasting your time and consolidating things to be able to work on a lot of different things at one time. So I'm big on a tuner and a metronome. So if I'm playing that close exercise all the way through from top to bottom and slurring it all and using my air, obviously breathing when I need to, but that's a long tone. Then I set my metronome, and I'm also working on my time. And I'm using the close number 3, so I'm working on my finger movements and my finger technique and my intervals on my finger. And then I've got the tuner going on my iPad or something like that. Not quite as much there, but so I'm working on 3 things there. I'm working on my time, I'm working on my air support, and I'm working on my fingering technique. The overtone series I wish I had found a little bit earlier, because the overtone series I could do a whole probably workshop on just breathing and overtones and getting your it evens out your tone from the bottom of your horn to the top of your horn, allows you to play altissimo notes. So overtones became a big part of my practice for a while. I was doing that and driving the people. At the time I was in one of the groups at Disney, and I drove the band leader crazy because I'd sit in the room next to him in the library and just play overtones all the time. And it must have wanted to kill me. So what I have them do is a folder where they have warm-ups is one category, or long tones is one category. Actually, it's warm-ups. So long tones, and then the next category would be scales and etudes and technical studies. And then the next category would be literature. So that's anything from, transcriptions to pieces that you're playing. And then of course there's the whole improvisation side, which is a whole other can of works. It all kind of comes together, but there's a lot to do. And there's also I lost the thought. There was one more thing that I was going to mention. It'll come to me. But so I have them do categories. And I will go in and out of practice times where I have time to practice, and other times I've not recently because we don't really have any work anymore, but back when there was, sometimes I would just be hanging on for dear life, just preparing for the next job and the next thing I had to do and working on whatever that next thing is. So it should be a blessing to be home and not have a lot to do so that I could practice and grow more. And I should practice more than I am. But yeah, I wish I had been given a practice routine and told to hit those things every day. So if you only have 5 minutes for long tones, only do 5 minutes for long tones. If you only have 5 minutes for your scales, only do 5 minutes for your scales. But do it every day. So you're not going to cram for an exam the day before and be able to, ace it the next day. So those little daily things are going to add up. And you can vary how much time you spend on each thing, but definitely try to do them every day. And I kind of do them in order. Start with the long tones, go on to scales studies, and then go on to, whatever I'm working on at the time, maybe tunes or improv or something like that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. What a great answer, and such wonderful feedback. It's like such a delight to have you as part of these sessions. I hope we can twist your arm and get you to come back and hang with us some more.
I would love to. I hope that I hope I explained it well enough that you could sort of follow what I was talking about, because I know it's a little bit nebulous, the whole what the tongue does when you play. It's like I wasn't joking when I said my students and I make faces at each other, because I get in there and I show them my tongue and I look and see where they're, how they're, because it really makes a difference how you move inside your mouth as to the way it comes out. And it works though. At least it does with my students.
Fantastic. Well, if you see Pear walking around there, tell him we say hey and send our love, and hopefully he'll come back with us too. He's done some great sessions with us as well, which everyone can watch in our studio. Speaking of which, www.clearwaterjazz.com/education will take you to our education and outreach page, and you can see all these upcoming sessions. They're all free. They're all done using Zoom, and then afterwards they're recorded and put in the studio or on the podcast. It's a really great growing resource. This coming Monday, we have an incredible lineup. Associate Professor of Jazz Trumpet, an internationally acclaimed jazz trumpeter, composer, arranger, educator, author, director of the legendary Count Basie Orchestra, Scotty Barnhart's going to be with us. And Dan Miller is going to be back right after or right before Scotty, doing his part 2, playing the blues and breaking down the changes. Dan did his first session with us just earlier this week or last week, and it was incredible. And he's got a resume that will fill from floor to ceiling in this room, and has played with some incredible people as well. So it's just so cool. All these wonderful educators and musicians. And Tammy, now you're part of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so everyone just stay tuned to the website for these upcoming sessions. We want to thank all of the Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation sponsors and supporters that help us keep this going. The studio is presented by Blue Water Wealth Management at Steward Partners. The podcast is presented by Marine Max Clearwater. So many sponsors, too many to mention, but we always like to give a shout out to our friends at the Al Downing Tampa Bay Jazz Association, who are great supporters as well. And Tammy, thank you so much for being a special part of this. I'll be in touch soon to hopefully get you to come back. And for everybody that participated today, thank you. And for those watching in the future, thank you. Stay safe out there. Be well. Please keep playing, and we'll see everybody soon.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, Tammy.